What's going on, retro gaming fans, and welcome to Rehab Gaming, the channel where we show you the tips and tricks in order to get your retro gaming systems back up and running and restore them to the condition they deserve to be in. In this episode, we're going to be going over the complete disassembly of a Nintendo GameBoy Advance. More specifically, we're going to be taking apart this Glacier model. So stay tuned and we'll get right at it. Alright, so for this project, you're going to need a 2.0 tri-wing bit in order to get the case screws out of the Game Boy Advance. There are a total of 6 case screws on the outside of the Game Boy Advance that needs to be removed with this tri-wing bit, and I'll point them out now. You will also need a fine-tip Phillips head screwdriver in order to remove a screw that's located in the battery compartment of the handheld console. Once you have all 6 tri-wing screws removed and that one Phillips screw down on the bottom of the battery compartment, you can lift off the back half of the Game Boy Advance shell. Once you remove the back half of the Game Boy Advance shell, you can also get in there and remove the top corner bumper buttons and also the 2 gray trim pieces on either side of the handheld console. Before I even start to unscrew the main board of the console, I like to detach the screen ribbon cable that's located on the top hand side. There are 2 small gray tabs on either side of this ribbon connector that need to be pushed up in order to unlock the connector so you can remove the ribbon cable. Now after these 2 tabs are unlocked, you can put your screwdriver in between the ribbon cable and the main board and gently lift up in order to remove the ribbon cable from the connector. Once you have that ribbon cable disconnected, go ahead and remove the power switch located on the bottom right hand corner when you're looking at the back of the console, to make sure that you don't lose this when you try to remove the board. Now there are a total of 3 Phillips head screws that need to be removed in order to get the main board out of the front half of the shell, and I'm going to point those out here. Once these 3 screws are removed, you can grab the game connector of the main board and lift the main board straight out of the top half of the shell. Now when I remove the main board from this handheld console, the A and B button contact pads and the start and select button contact pads came up with the main board, so be mindful of that when you are pulling out your main board, just to make sure that you don't lose them, and just go ahead and peel them away from the main board and set them off to the side. Now as you can see, when I'm trying to remove the directional main contact pad, the button is actually stuck to this contact pad. This is another thing that you can run into while disassembling these consoles, so just be mindful of that and gently peel the contact pad from the button so you don't tear the membrane on the contact pads. Now to clean up this console, we're going to be using 99% isopropyl alcohol, a soft bristle toothbrush, and some Q-tips wherever we need to get into the small nooks and crannies of the console itself and any of the button hole areas. So once you get all the buttons out of the front half of the shell, the next thing we need to tackle is trying to safely get the screen out of the front half of the casing. The one thing you do not want to do when trying to lift the screen out is grabbing it by the ribbon cable, because you can damage this ribbon cable. So I'm actually using a flathead screwdriver in order to try and lift up on the screen very gently and try and separate it from the front half of the console. So we ended up getting the console completely cleaned up, getting the shell all cleaned out, and now it's time for reassembly. First, what I like to do is reseat the buttons in the top half face of the console, and then lay the button membranes on top of the buttons. Now make sure that when you're putting the button membranes back in, that you get the posts that the membranes are supposed to sit on and locate them and put the posts through the holes on the membranes. That way the membranes are oriented properly inside the casing. Next, we're going to take the two gray trim pieces and set them back into place on the front half of the console shell. Once you get the two gray trim pieces set back into place, you can now take your main board of your console and set it back in the front half of the shell, making sure that all of the screw posts line up, and also paying attention that you don't sandwich the ribbon cable for the screen underneath the main board. Once you have the main board seated back in the console, you can go ahead and replace the 3 Phillips screws that you took out that holds in this board. And now put the power switch back in the console. Now take note that the little part that sets on the power switch itself connected to the main board is actually going to be on the top hand side or facing towards the back half of the shell. So make sure that that little U shape cutout in the power switch itself actually goes over the power switch mounted to the board and is located on the top side. Now it's time to put the bumpers back into place. So there's actually a little hole where the bumpers rest in as a pivot point, and the spring that is attached to the bumper buttons themselves slide down into the top half of the casing in a little area that's kind of shaped like a groove. So just make sure that you get the springs seated where they need to be and that the buttons are actually on top of the holes for the pivot. After you get the screws put back in for the main board, you can plug the ribbon cable back in and make sure that you lock the two gray retainer clips on the connector so that the ribbon cable cannot be pulled loose. Now that we have everything into place, it is time to replace the back side of the console shell. Just make sure that when you're dropping this onto the console that everything lines up, especially with the top bumper buttons. Make sure that the posts for those buttons seat properly into their holes located on the backhand side of the console shell, and make sure that nothing gets pinched or is binding once you get the shell ready to screw back together. Now, when I'm screwing the back half of the console shell back to the console itself, I like to start with the Phillips head screw located in the battery compartment. That way I don't forget about it. This is one of those screws that is really easy to forget to put back in place, but it is extremely important to make sure that you do get this screw put into the console. All that's left now is to take your battery cover and put it back into place. And there you have it. That covers the entire process of breaking down the Game Boy Advance handheld console and reassembling it from start to finish. So that wraps it up for this project. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget we have our own Facebook page and Twitter, and we will have those links in the video description down below. So without further ado, thank you for stopping by, and we hope you have a wonderful day.